Hello learners, we now come to the specific aspect of the novel as a literary form, as part of our course on creative writing. We know that creative writing deals with different genres, different literary forms, and today we are going to look at the novel. What is a novel and how does the novel function and what are its different characteristics or different aspects. Let's start. Now, here we are going to look at it by dividing into 6 subsections. The first is definition and origin. What is a novel defined as, or how can we look at a novel? What can be different terms, and what are the points through which we can say the novel came into being? We'll look at its origins and how it has developed and the point through which it has traveled and come. Number 1. Now, novels, as we understand today, are lengthy fictional narratives. That means they're not about something that has taken place in the real world, in real time. So a novel is different from history, in the sense that history is something that has taken place, an event that has happened, is an experience which is represented. What we have here is length and prose form. That means it is length, it is long, it is in the form of prose. Normally, we have novels which are also written in verse, but usually novels are written in prose, and it has around, this is a rough estimate, some novels are very long, say something like War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy is a very long novel. It has words which exceed the number we're talking about, but usually it has words that go beyond 50,000 words, and it deals with complex themes and characters. So when we define a novel, we're not looking at short narrative, because short narrative can be a short story, a longer short story, or something which is shortened novel is known as a novella. But a novel is a long fictional narrative. And it is fictional, so it is not something that is based on realistic or real occurrences, even though we have novels which are historical. That means a novelist can look at a story which is realistic, which has really taken place, and retell the story in the form of a novel. We'll come to that. Then a novel has character. That means it deals with people, it deals with persons, and those characters are developed. Why? Because we get to know these characters in terms of a person. Who is a person and what is the nature of the person, how that person has worked and how the person has moved. So that person, it can be a life story, it can be some experience of a person, it can be some issue with a person, it can be some situation which the person is in. So we can see the novel deals with length, it is in prose, it is fictional, and it deals with people. It deals with human beings, usually. We also have fables. For example, we have a novel called Animal Farm by George Orwell, where we have animals as characters. But they are not the thing through which we can define a novel in a general sense. Generally, usually, a novel has characters, and a novel has people, and novel is long, it's fictional, and written in prose. Then we come to the third most important aspect of the definition of a novel, that it has a plot. That means it has different themes. It has different themes, meaning it has different subjects or topics. Those topics, say for instance, a novel can deal with society, a novel can deal with war, a novel can deal with love, a novel can deal with pain and anguish and trauma and sadness. So there are these different aspects which support the elements of the novel, which make the elements of the novel, and that is how the novel goes forward. This is what we can look at, the primary aspects of how a novel can be defined, or how we can approach the definition of a novel. Now let us look at how the novel term came, because the term novel, if you look at it in dictionary meaning, novel means new. So when the novel first emerged, it was something that appeared to be new. We know that if we look at different literary types, if we go to the past, we know that poetry and drama were classical types. In the classical world, we had poetry, we had verse, we had theater, with performances. The novel is a later form. It is something that started in the West with the 17th and 18th century. Before that, there were prose narratives, but only by the 18th century did the novel actually generate its momentum. So, the idea of the novel is telling of a new story. It's a story which, as we have seen in definition, is told through the process of narrativization. It is a narrative which is fictionalized. Now, from a short story or shorter story, we have a longer story. So novel is an expansion of a story. A short story, for instance, a short story has singular episode. That means a short story will have one episode. But a novel will have multiple episodes and it will be complex in character. That means a novel, as it develops, as we have seen historically from the 18th century to 19th, 20th, and now, that novels have become more and more complex. It has evolved from plain storytelling, from simple storytelling to looking at relationships. It has now looked at different layers. The novel now looks at different layers and complex situations. It has evolved. From the early period of the 18th century, when you had novels like, say, Richardson's Clarissa in the West, or Robinson Crusoe by Daniel Defoe. I'm sure we have all read Robinson Crusoe, or we know about the story. Now we have complex stories. Now we have different layers. We have society, we have the personalities, we have psychology, we have trauma, we have pain, we have joy. So you see how the novel form has developed over time. And the early examples of the novel, if we go to the novel as a form which was slightly loose in construction, but very effective, we go back to the time of, we can take the example of Don Quixote by the Spanish writer Cervantes, or if we go even a little back in time, we can go to the French writer Rabelais, who in his Gargantua and Pantagruel talked about characters which are larger than life, situations which are larger than life. Gargantua and Pantagruel by Rabelais was satirical in nature, whereas Cervantes was written it appeared to be a parody of, or it appeared to be a re-examination of chivalric culture of the medieval time, but also comment on the nature of life and ideals of Spanish culture and desire and human aspiration and failure and frailty of being human in the 17th century. These are early examples. And as the novel developed, it consolidated, the plot got even more complex, stories acquired different thematic dimensions, characters are developed. That started happening as we move forward historically from the 18th century onwards. So what are the key characteristics of a novel? Novels provide ample scope for character exploration, development, complex, nuanced representation. So when you come across a story, for instance, in a story we get a character, we know only one aspect of a character. So something to do with food, something to do with emotion, something to do with one aspect of a relation. But in a novel, we get in-depth, detailed information about a character, different sides of a character, different emotions, situations, responses, understanding, knowledge of a character. So, length and depth, these are two very important aspects of novel writing, or that these are features that we find in a novel. It has extended length and it enables, because of the extended length, the first point that we noted, first point that we came across, because of its extended length, it gives us the scope to address societal, moral, ethical issues comprehensively in detail. We can see what kind of a situation a person is in. We can see how a person is responding, understanding, reacting to certain situations which are part of that story or that world or that situation. So because of the length of the narrative, because of the complexity of the plot, the novel affords that, so that we can get a picture of the person, society, or the world through the novel form. Now, a novel has fiction at its heart. That means a novel is fictionalized. It's different from history. It's a narrative. History is also narrative. But a novel is fictionalized. That means a novel is primarily fictional. That means it has a very, very vital component which comes through the imagination. The references may be real. Someone may be writing about Delhi as a city, Singapore as a city, the different monuments of Singapore or Delhi, or something in the United States or Sri Lanka. The situation, the geography, the description may be very realistic. But it is, after all, in spite of the real life elements, fictionalized. And even though the writers in writing may draw inspiration from real life events, we have had novels which are based on real happenings. We have had novels on the Holocaust, we have novels on the 9/11, we have novels about people who have lived real lives. We have had what we call known as biofiction, novels based on the lives of real people. But in the representation, in the way they are told, in the way they are presented, they emerge, they come to us. In what form? They come to us in the form of fiction. That is the distinguishing characteristic between fiction and non-fiction. Non-fiction also gives us information. Fiction gives us information, but through the lens of the imagination. Now, what does a novel have? A novel has a plot structure. What is a plot? A plot is the organization of different elements of a story. Now, for the reader to be interested in what's going on, usually a novel has some kind of conflict. It can be in terms of action, it can be in terms of what is seen, in terms of what is happening, or it can be conflict that takes place within the mind. Not always everything is taking place on the outside. It's something that will take place in the inside. So a novelist may choose to write about society, something which is seen from the outside, like say the novels by Jane Austen, where we get social relationships, we get social situations, or something by Kafka, Franz Kafka, the Czech novelist Franz Kafka, who in his novels writes about the psychological turmoil which is not seen, but a conflict is inside. And a novel in the plot, a novel in the form of a plot, through the plot, the novel looks at things by pacing them, organizing them, giving them a sequence, and leading them to a climax. So when it comes to a climax, then the story reaches its vital point. So from the beginning to the climax, it progresses. And how does it progress? Through the help of what we know as a plot structure. A theme is important because, after all, the novel is telling a story. And novel is a story through different topics. What kind of topics? It can be social norms, it can be human behavior, it can be thought, it can be emotion, and so it can give us a picture of society. So novel, in spite of it being fiction, in the fact that a novel is fictionalized, a novel is fiction, it actually serves to present us certain ideas of society. Maybe a society of our time, society of the past. So it is also a form of documentation through the lens of the imagination. And if we look at themes, novels usually present to us questions of ethics, politics, economy, and social values. These are some of the themes that you find consistently in different novels. What are the major categories and how do novels operate? Let's look at that. So, we have what are known as realist novels. Novels which you read and then we can connect to the real world, the world that we know. So we may read a novel and we read about a person who may be very, very real, as if very similar to someone I have known, someone I've heard about. They'll say, oh, this is so real, this is so credible, this is so believable. I know someone like this. Maybe a situation, maybe an experience. So realist novels are extremely popular and have a wide readership because the reader can directly identify with what is shown and what is depicted. One example of this we can look at, of course, there are different examples, but one example that comes to mind and which is a very popular novel, it is Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, which is a 19th century novel and which tells us about 19th century life, society and values. Then we have romantic novels, where the focus is on the relationships, nature of the relationships, nature of the bonding, the connection. So realist novels can have romantic elements, but a romantic novel will focus on the emotional relationships. It can have happy endings where everything ends well. Again, we can take the example of novels by Jane Austen, or we can look at novels of the present time. One example of a recent example, which is now a classic romantic novel, is The Notebook by Nicholas Sparks. Then we have mystery novels. In mystery novels, the focus is on not on society, but on the suspense, the nature of the plot, the nature of the solving of the crime, how are crimes solved, how do things move from one to another, how things are kept in the dark, from dark to resolution. Something which is not known, say there is a murder, say there is some kind of event, say there is some kind of danger, say some kind of crime, and then it unravels. When the crime takes place, we don't know. We're not aware. When the theft takes place, we don't know. Then we see that slowly and slowly it emerges. So mystery novels are also very popular. Today we see great emergence or fascination in the 21st century for what we know as the thriller novels. So something like The Girl on the Train, Gone Girl. These are very, very exciting novels which form under the rubric of the thriller or the earlier mystery novels, because they have mystery, they have suspense, and they have resolution. Then we have what we know as science fiction novels. They're also known as speculative novels. Now this term, science fiction, appears to be contradictory because science deals with facts and fiction with imagination. So what are you looking at when you talk of science fiction? When you're talking of science fiction, what you're looking at is that kind of fiction where we are looking at scientific probability as a base. Some kind of, maybe a different planet, maybe a different species, something which is not taking place as yet, but which is speculative, which is possible, which may be someday maybe scientifically realizable. So it is a probable situation that is projected, which may not be real, which may not happen, which may never happen. We don't know. But it's a projection of a fantastic situation which has credibility and consistency in terms of the logic that is employed. One such example of the speculative, imaginative fiction of this kind, where there is a scientific trust to the probability of that taking place, that it may happen. That has not happened, but it may happen. So it is in the realm of speculation, conjecture. And one early example of this is 1984 by George Orwell. Then there are fantasy novels. Fantasy novels deal with the role where we have magical elements, supernatural elements, unbelievable things done. Things we know are not believable. We know that cannot happen, but it takes place. magical elements. One very, very fascinating example of this can be seen in the Harry Potter series, where magic plays such an important role. When you read those novels by say J.K. Rowling under the Harry Potter series, we know that these things cannot happen around us. We won't meet such a person on the street. But when we enter that world, we see that real. Inside that world, that fantasy, that magic, that supernatural, that unbelievable element acquires life. It becomes worldly. It becomes believable. So these are also novels which are fascinating for the readers. So these are just a few types. We can have different types again, which we have not discussed, but gradually we'll talk about them. So we have dystopian novels, novels that deal with the dark side of life. We have utopian novels which deal with ideal way of life. We have the social problem novel that deals with social problems. Okay, so there can be different types, but as you can see, the role of the imagination and the organization and construction of that through a very, very well-structured process brings that world through the imagination to life for the reader. So let us look at the common features. Now, one of the features that we find in different kinds of novels, whether it's a detective novel, it deals with knowledge, discovery, revelation, something that we come to know. As we read the novel, when we finish the novel, we see, oh, this is something that is now emerging. This is something that emerges. It can be through a journey of a character. A character from ignorance moves to another point. There was a modern novelist called James Joyce, and in one of his early novels, he talks about the discovery, the process of self-discovery, coming to know the person and the person's self-realization. A portrait of the artist is a young man. In that novel, we see how gradually there is discovery. Who is the character? How does the character behave? How does the character function? What is the nature of the knowledge? These are things that can be connected to that world, that society. And so usually when we talk of identity and self-discovery, we look at that in terms of society. Social context becomes important in the delineation of characters' lives, progress, and development. So let's look at the next aspect, and that is conflict and struggle. There can be, this is something which I just mentioned a little while ago, it can be internal or external. Conflict that is related to a person, it can be conflict in society. So it can be a novel that deals with crisis of the environment. The recent novels of Amitav Ghosh, for instance, look at the crisis. It can be the crisis that comes to endangered peoples, ethnicities, societies, cultural values that are under threat. So conflict and struggle. In the novels of Kafka, we have psychological struggle. Novels of Camus, we have psychological struggle. Whereas we have novels nowadays being written which address very, very vital social and environmental issues. So issues that relate to people in society, issues that relate to individuals. These are some of the aspects of conflict and struggle in society. And there has been a consistent thread, irrespective of all of these, where human love and relationships have occupied center stage in the novel. Love. Love may be unrequited, love may be rewarded, love may be fulfilling, love may be something that may not reach the desired goal. Doesn't quite matter. But then these are different aspects. We have fulfilled love in Jane Austen, and we also have love that is thwarted, love that leads to complex issues in Thomas Hardy. So a novel actually covers and deals with the very, very wide and complex spectrum that come under the rubric of love. And it also deals with the complex nature of human relationships. how human beings change over time, how people react, how people adapt, how people go along, and how people separate. Throughout the history of the novel, we find these different dimensions of love and relationships being explored within the novel form. Then it deals with love is not something which is solitary, but it encompasses family dynamics, conflicts, accommodation, understanding, knowledge. All of them are brought into the frame. So love and relationships are very crucial and have consistently figured across different subgenres of the novel. So we look at social commentary. This is something that reflects the question about norms, what are values, and they are contemporary relevant to the reader. That's why the reader can identify and connect. Let's look at evolution and impact, because as the novel has journeyed, when you look at the novel, which novel are we going to read as an example? What time does it come from? Are we looking at a 19th century novel by Dostoevsky, or are we looking at a very, very modern novel by Salman Rushdie? What are we going to look at and how it has impacted readership and what has happened? So from the early forms, we have seen that it has evolved from a very, very simplistic structural frame to a very complex examination of life and various issues. And some of the influential authors of the early period are Jane Austen, Dickens, and of course, if we go outside of England and out of the English language, we can look at someone like Dostoevsky or Camus, Kafka, whom I have mentioned. So, the impact. Novels shape not only our imagination, but also our understanding. It gives us a picture of society. It also gives us the insight into society. It engages the reader. The reader actually enters that narrative frame and comes to know life and society better. Because these themes are connected through different eras, so reading a novel and engaging in it, writing a novel, actually gives us the scope. It's an enabler to understand the worlds in which we live, how we operate, and how we engage. So we now come to the summary. Let us do a recap and look at the key points. We have seen the novel is a fictional narrative. It deals with character development, it engages plot, it has a plot, and it has thematic depth. There are different categories. Some of the important issues that we have looked at are identity, conflict, love, social commentary, and of course, it deals with human experience. What is the importance in literature? It is a very, very immersive, interactive resource through which readers come to know life, society better. And the future novel, novel is in its prime. So we can see that novel will progress further, explore newer vistas, look at issues which are beyond our understanding now, but take us to newer heights. So this is how we look at the novel in this section. We'll explore different aspects of this form further on. Thank you so much.